So basically, the presentation is going to focus on English language teaching in Malta in view of demographic changes and in view of the situation in Malta changing from bilingual to multilingual, and we're going to sit down. So basically a quick overview of my presentation, just for you to have a look at. Okay, so this is a small part of a larger research study. Okay, so this was my doctoral study, and it focused on Malta's bilingual situation, which is part of its historical legacy of foreign education. And my doctorate focused on Malta's social cultural context and its influence on teachers' linguistic identities. Teachers' views on students' current English proficiency level was also part of the study. Moreover, as I said before, Malta's experience of the global trend of linguistically diverse classrooms, because of rapidly changing demographic shifts, are changing Malta from a bilingual country into a multilingual country. And this obviously has an impact. It has an impact on our educational system. Why? Because our classrooms are becoming more linguistically and culturally diverse. And Maltese educators are naturally incorporating cross-linguistic practices in their English lessons. It was always the case, because Malta is a bilingual country, we code switch a lot during our normal daily interactions. However, now they need to rethink these strategies and how they can actually change their pedagogies to make cross-linguistic practices more strategic. And obviously this had an impact on professional practice, professional development, what I was mentioning before during my question, and initial education program, initial teacher education programs. Okay, so a quick review of how my study was conducted. I conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews with 9 primary school teachers. This was done in order to explore the bilingual identities and their pedagogical practices. And then I used thematic analysis to identify the common themes within my participants' rich accounts of experiences related to their teaching. Okay, and this is the cyclical research process of my study. Okay, my participants. So I used purposive sampling. So as I said before, 9 Maltese primary school teachers, and they all had over 10 years teaching experience. In Malta, the educational system basically has 3 types of schooling. So there is the state school, which is completely funded by the state, church-run schools, which are also funded by the state, but they operate through a ballot system where the parents apply for their children to go into these Catholic church schools, and then they are drawn by ballots. And then we have private independent schools which charge a fee. So I chose participants from each of these schools so that we can get an interesting idea of what is happening within each sector. I also chose teachers which were teaching at the different ends of the primary spectrum. So we had early years teachers and junior years teachers. And I had 8 females and 1 male teacher. Why? Because this represents the gender imbalance within the teaching profession. And ages vary between 30s to 50s. Okay, a bit about my beautiful country. Malta and our linguistic background, so we're located in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. We have a history of continuous coexistence of at least 2 languages. Almost all citizens are bilingual. English and Maltese are both official languages, whereas Maltese is our national language. Italian is considered also to be a 3rd language. Maltese and English are both languages of instruction, and they're also subjects in their own rights. Okay, Maltese is the dominant language, so it is our first language, L1. Although a large number of Maltese nationals choose English also as a mother tongue. And as I said before, there is a constant interplay, constant code switching of both languages. Our educational system, okay, so this is largely a product of our colonial heritage. So its foundations are essentially built on the British educational system. The choice of language for instruction, the design of educational curricula, the selection of textbooks have been significantly impacted by colonial practices and their enduring effects in the post-colonial era. As I said, both Maltese and English are mediums of instruction, and they're also subjects. And yes, educators frequently engage in code switching during lessons. Written English remains the predominant language in Maltese educational systems. Why? Because there are comparatively fewer resources in Maltese. And also, English is the language of tertiary education. Bilingual and multilingual development in schools is actually supported by language policies aimed at encouraging positive attitudes towards Maltese and English, but also other languages. The teaching of English in Malta. Okay, so this is basically founded in the concept of a bilingual educational system where most of the importance is placed on both official languages. English is formally introduced in Malta in the first year of primary education. And the national curriculum also encourages teachers to use the English language during certain subjects, obviously English, maths, science, and technology. And it is also acknowledging the benefits of code switching when necessary. We have gone quite a long way, because I remember when I was training, I'm an educator at heart, so basically I started off in the classroom, as possibly most of us have. I remember when I was training, when I was receiving my training rather, it was unheard of for us to be actually code switching in class. So basically, when I was doing my teacher training program, if I had a teaching practice visit and my tutor walks in and hears me code switch during a language lesson, I would have been penalized for this. Whereas now we are more open-minded, we are acknowledging the fact that fluid language practices are not only okay, but they are also a must. A minimum of 90 minutes per day are dedicated to language and reading instruction, and the teaching of English as a second language or as a foreign language or English as an additional language is becoming increasingly essential. Why? Because we have an influx of non-Maltese students. And what is also interesting is that because of these demographic changes, there is a current shift to an all-English medium of instruction in schools. Why? Because the English language is potentially more accessible to these linguistically diverse students. Okay, just a brief idea of current demographic shifts on the island. Now, Malta is very small, okay, so you need to keep that in mind. So, in the past 2 decades, Malta has been considered to be a symbolic gateway into Europe. So this means that asylum seekers and refugees have been from Malta at unprecedented rates. So this was something quite new in the past 2 decades. In 2004, Malta joined the EU. So this meant an increase in transnational migration. There has been an influx of foreign labour and the importation of foreign labour by our government over the past few years to sustain economic growth. So all these factors added together mean that 1/5 of Malta's population and over a quarter of Malta's workforce are currently made up of foreign nationals. And this has been unprecedented, and this has been very, very rapid. So just an idea, the past decade has seen an increase of over 95,000 non-Maltese nationals, where the population of Malta stood at just over 500,000 in 2021, making it the most densely populated country in Europe. Italians make up the large majority of non-Maltese living on the island. This is followed by British residents. We have other common nationalities, including Indian, Filipino, Serbian, Bulgarian, and Libyan, amongst others. And yes, this is why our country is slowly but surely turning from a bilingual into a multilingual country. Effectively, we are becoming a cultural and linguistic melting pot of sorts. Just some visuals, just to get you into the picture. And here there are different nationalities, some of them. Okay, now, how does this impact our schools? So, just an idea. So, non-Maltese pupils, okay, in 2012-2013, the academic year, stood at 6,675. In 8 years, this number has more than tripled. So it is quite a rapid change. At the same time, what is very interesting is that the number of Maltese children is decreasing because we have the lowest fertility rate in Europe and one of the lowest in the world. So Maltese primary schools host the largest percentage of non-Maltese children. This is estimated at around 15% of the school's population. And yes, obviously, this has a cultural and linguistic impact on schools. This can be the source of enrichment, but it's also challenging for our educators. Maltese educators are essentially teaching and communicating with students who do not speak either English or Maltese. So not only are they finding it challenging to teach them, but moreover, they cannot communicate with them. Just another visual here. This is the fertility rate in Malta. And this is taken from another study, which I have just conducted recently on a much larger scale. These are the languages, the many languages spoken in our Maltese classrooms. So this is very interesting to see the concoction of different languages in our classrooms. I visit schools, I do school visits for teaching practice, and sometimes I have walked into primary school classrooms where there are 1 or 2 Maltese children only. The rest of the children are all non-Maltese, and they are coming from different nationalities. It's beautiful. It can be very enriching. However, educators need to be trained to deal with this situation. Okay, so the findings. Okay, so the findings show that the participants speak the language dominant in their families. However, both languages are nonetheless used equally and interchangeably. Participants favor full immersion practices during language teaching because this is a product of the way that they were taught. They often, however, resort to language mixing, code switching, translanguaging. Again, I can fully empathize with the previous presenter when she said that they did not know what translanguaging was. They were actually using it, but they did not know the correct word for it, which was interesting. And they also resort to translation or repetition to mitigate these language barriers. Different languages and code switching or translation practices are usually used during certain times of the lesson when reinforcing a point, providing instructions, clarifying concepts, emphasizing key points, and for effective classroom management. However, my participants, although they did admit that they are using pluralistic strategies within English language classrooms, they still feel guilty about it. They actually mention the word guilty. It is not quite right. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Again, this is because of a lack of training. Also, although we are becoming a multilingual society, so we need to use the English language even more because of the many foreign nationals living in our country. Ironically, the majority of participants voiced their concerns about the declining level of English in Malta. And the concerns are a lack of reading, where children, unfortunately, do not read as much as they used to before, as we used to, and an increase in the use of technology. They spend a lot of time on social media, they play YouTube, etc., which takes away the time that we, my generation, and even younger, my children's generation, used to spend on reading. Also, which is interesting, my participants mentioned the influence of popular culture, where Maltese children now are adopting an Americanized style of speaking and writing in English. There's a growing American influence on the English language, which specifically highlights the media's role in changing language varieties. Both American and British English are legitimate language models. However, there seems to be a European academic bias which favors the English model. Standard British English still remains prominent, not especially as a written medium in education. As I said before, my participants actually spoke about the lack of training programs, initial training and professional development sessions. They believe that there needs to be a shift in the way the English language is taught at schools, where the focus should be more on listening comprehensions, more oral component, more exposure to children's literature, more fun and play-based learning, and less emphasis on summative assessment. They mentioned physical resources such as multimodal teaching, smaller class populations, and prioritizing human resources. More focus on the communicative aspect, less so on grammar taught out of context. And educators should work with parents in order to highlight how important it is for a child to grow up having a good command of the English language. Some recommendations for the future of language teaching. Okay, so English as a second language requires a shift to incorporate English as a foreign language or English as an additional language into these programs. Placing students predominantly in mainstream settings, only dividing them into smaller groups for specific tasks, with occasional pull-out classes if need be. Reconsidering the roles of Maltese and English as languages of instruction, where the use of flexible language practices may be used to bridge language gaps, training and support, building bilingual and multilingual strategies on students' prior knowledge to facilitate language transfer, and legitimizing the use of student L1 in the English language classroom to support the students. Curricular and assessment changes, focus language teaching on communication, interest-based materials, and contextual grammar instruction, where the application is a priority. encourage self-expression and creative writing, fostering the love for the language, creating literacy-rich environments, hopefully to transmit a love for reading, further explore the use of multimodal text, and provide authentic language materials to aid the contextual application of language skills. Okay, finally, strengthen English proficiency and nurture a love for reading. Again, encouraging parental involvement, inculcate a culture of self-reflection among educators. I think this is very important, where the educators feel that they do have agency, and also where they could potentially seek self-sought training, not only rely on the state or the school to provide it. Promoting language classes as safe spaces where the students may use different languages, investing further in resources, and differentiating between general and language-specific achievements when assessing multilingual students. Okay, so the results of the study obviously present implications related to the Maltese educational system, and there is a need for a pedagogical shift, focusing on inclusive teaching strategies, a revision of English language teaching programs and methods of assessment, additional human and physical resources, and the promotion of equity in education, the provision of support systems for disadvantaged and minority groups. Obviously, this necessitates the development of a teacher workforce which is more culturally and linguistically diverse to meet the demands of Malta's increasingly diverse classrooms. Thank you very much.